What is canon? Is everything canon? This is a question that has circulated the community for a very long time, since I started playing and long before. The general asking of what is and what is not canon. Now oftentimes you may have heard that all these stories are written from the perspective of the Imperium, so they are propaganda and unreliable. And that was a pretty big opinion and theory a few years ago, but I don't hear it very much anymore. With many books coming out from the perspective of other factions and species, I think that we can all put this theory away, as it has been more or less done away with. Another idea was that information was unreliable in the 41st millennium. This too has not really stuck, and honestly never made much sense in the first place. For very specific events that were told by an outside observer, this could be true, but the large majority of Warhammer lore comes from the perspective of a character, and is definitely true. The only place I could give any ground for any of these theories are the rulebooks, as these are generally from the perspective of humanity and the Imperium, and are not usually really following a character at all. But even then, it's still canon what is said in these books, just perhaps slightly biased. This is not to discredit the idea that things are not fully canon, and I somewhat agree with that specific statement, but you need to let me explain. In my opinion, the greatest issue with Warhammer lore is that it is written largely by a team of authors who obviously do not all get along, or work together, or talk really at all. From my understanding, the teams in Games Workshop were not always separated. Generally, the modeling, artists, lore writers, etc. all worked together in one building, and now that is not the case. They are all separate, they don't talk to each other nearly as much, there's not a lot of communication. This is just from what I know. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, if you're a GW employee, I guess. Regardless, this writer discrepancy and the too many authors in the kitchen results in some factions looking absolutely ridiculous in their novels, but also extremely cool in their codexes. The best example of these are the Eldar and the Tau, but this of course does happen to every faction. Simply put, authors can be biased, authors can be bad, and sometimes authors just have no idea what they're writing about. There is a way to solve the discrepancy between codex and novel, and that in my opinion is to just take everything with a grain of salt. Events that play out in a codex timeline are canon and definitely happened, but if you want to know exactly how they happen, you're going to need to read the book. If there is a book on the event, of course. On the other hand, if a unit or a character is described one way in the codex and shown differently in a novel, I honestly think the Codex lore is better, and it's just a better baseline in general. What first comes to mind is the duel between Imhotep and Helbrecht. If you only read the Codex lore on this fight, you will see that it's a very close battle. Helbrecht keeps striking down Imhotep again and again, but Imhotep keeps repairing and getting back up. However, if you read the book Dishonored, where we get an actual telling of the battle, the point of view and everything, we can see that the Stormlord kind of just wrecks Helbrecht. He humiliates him, if anything else. He is completely just outdone, outmatched at every turn. Imhotep's genius completely destroys him, and the duel is nothing. Like, Imhotep just solos poor Helbrecht, and like I said, humiliates him. This is also a good litmus test to see if a YouTuber is talking about Codex lore / wiki lore, because they are the same thing generally, or has actually read the books. Specifically towards Imhotep and Helbrecht, this fight. You get the idea. This can all be chalked up to the Codex being a mere summary of events, and not the whole story, as well as the Codex potentially giving slightly biased information towards the faction it is representing. As for units and characters, I see the Codex as a good reference for such things. If you stick to the Codex, every unit is pretty cool, all the characters are pretty cool, generally pretty unique, and all their positives are laid out quite well and easily digestible. But if you read about this unit in a novel, they might be part of the faction going up against the main character, and depending on how the writing is, they might just get completely dumpstered on, and it goes against everything the Codex ever said. But like I said, this kind of just comes down to poor writing, and author favoritism at times. Space Marine novels are quite bad for this. The Marine characters often have incredible plot armor, they're just written very poorly. They need the Space Marine, or whoever it is, not always Space Marines, but oftentimes it's Space Marines. They need the Astartes character to win, and the way that they have them win is usually pretty lame, poorly written. Let's look at War of Secrets, for example. A pretty awful book, I think we can all agree, especially for the Dark Angel fans out there. Lieutenant Farron activates his Belisarian Furnace again and again and again to get through every challenge in the book, and even I'm not an author. I could see multiple ways of writing that book differently that would not take very much effort, but thanks, Phil Kelly. For characters, speaking of Phil Kelly, I'll mention Farsight. In Codex lore, even in the supplement perhaps, Farsight is a genius. He's a hero, he's brave, he knows a strange secret, he's very honorable, he's hot-blooded, hot-headed. He definitely gets angry, but he's still an exemplar of the Mont Ka. He's an exemplar of strategy. He's a complete genius in the books. Sorry, in the Codex. When we go to the books, the Phil Kelly Farsight novels in particular, Farsight kind of just becomes this belligerent, very hot-headed, prone to anger, bad temper commander who just throws himself into fights, doesn't think very much, makes mistakes all the time, gets tons of his warriors killed. He's kind of an embarrassment, to be honest, and he loses a lot in some of these Phil Kelly books. Losing is fine, by the way, it's just the way that you lose is what really matters. Unfortunately, Farsight's in the same book as Cato Sicaria, so you know how that usually goes, but even now the Phil Kelly books are just, well, they're just bad, simply put. Farsight's just this insecure commander who makes all these mistakes. Everything the Ethereals say about him is kind of true at times. He spends most of his time thinking about Shadowsun and how much better Shadowsun is than him. It's just very weird. It's just very weird writing, very weird decisions that he makes in these books. And that leads into a more overarching thing, and that is the Phil Kelly Tau, the Phil Kelly Ethereals. Tau society is this surveillance state. There's very little harmony. It's on the brink of collapse. The fourth sphere expansion, whatever, wants to genocide all aliens in the Empire. We're getting chaos corrupted Tau. The Tau is now just the Imperium, but blue with anime mech. Like, come on. This goes against so much of what codexes say, what other books say, what other authors have already established in Tau lore. I assume you get my point. They're just really bad. They make the Tau look really bad, really boring. The characters are extremely flat. But look at the Codex and read some books that are not written by Phil Kelly, who actually writes okay Codex lore and okay fantasy lore, but I think that's just because he'd rather do that. But anyways, you will get interesting characters, advanced warfare tactics, in-depth, unique alien culture, society, a lot more. So which are you supposed to take as canon? And in my opinion, both, but with your own kind of spin on things. Yes, these Tau are this unique alien society who are extremely harmonious, but yes, they also have issues. Some Ethereals have had a change of perspective, as described in the book Elemental Council, and this is largely due to the Space Marines and Imperium of the Damocles Crusade. So while some may be corrupt or see differently, which is a better way of doing this, I think, not all are, and even those who now dislike humans are still seeking the best for the greater good and their people. I think that's a much better way of looking at it. That's how it's generally showed in Elemental Council and other books. Farsight himself has his flaws of temper, of course, but he's also a genius, as shown in his general lore. Let's use food as an example, an analogy, you may say. A classic burger, right? Sure. At the end of the day, a burger is a burger, but not every single burger tastes the same or is made the same way. A McDonald's burger is made of cheap, low-quality resources, bad ingredients, very little passion put into it, if any at all. It's very corporate, just churning out a product to have this low-quality burger that's cheap, right? Now you get a cookbook. Or you make your own recipe. You make a burger at home. You buy all the fancy ingredients for it. You put your heart and soul into this burger. You're making it for your spouse, for yourself, whatever. You care about it a lot. You're making it. It's extremely good. It's super good. You're super proud of it. Are these the same things? No. There are both burgers, though. So they are the same thing in concept, I suppose you could say. But they're not really the same burger. But they're still burgers. One is made with passion and love and is high quality. The other is low quality, made without passion, made for a paycheck. But they're still burgers. You don't use the description of one or the other to only define what a burger is. And you don't base all burgers off of either of these ones. But again, they're both burgers. I think you can look at lore in a pretty similar manner. The Tau are this and that, but in the end they're just the Tau. You can kind of choose which Tau to enjoy more than the other one, I suppose. I hope that analogy made sense. Let me know if it sucked, but I think it made sense personally. Some other examples could be, yes, the Eldar are super cool. They're very cool. Their units are very strong, very unique, just awesome in general when you read about them in the Codex. But now, if John Space Marine needs to win his fight, and he's fighting a striking Scorpion, or against a dire Avenger, whatever, the author probably is going to have John Space Marine steamroll the Eldar, unless the author is good, but most cases this is a Space Marine novel, we know what we're in for. Does this mean every Dire Avenger or every Striking Scorpion is going to lose to a Space Marine, or is not the equivalent of a Space Marine, or is far, far lower than a Space Marine, etc., etc.? No, this does not mean that. A Striking Scorpion can easily go toe-to-toe with a Space Marine, that's pretty obvious, I think, but John Space Marine needs to win this fight, he needs to advance the plot. The author might not really care about this book, he might not like the Eldar, he might like the Space Marines a lot, he might just be a bad author. So there you go, I think you get my point. We're also going to do an episode about this on lore crimes, so check that out once we do it. It'll be more in-depth, more of a conversation between all four of us, so we'll get more opinions, which I think is good. Comment below your opinion as well, so that we can get some discussion going, some multiple perspectives. But anyways, overall, I think you need to just read what you have time to read, and kind of just piece together an overall picture of a faction, character, a unit, etc. You also need to use common sense, and you have to recognize and understand when a character is acting a certain way or doing a certain thing due to bad writing or just plot convenience. Take a book like Elemental Council more seriously than a book like Farsight Blade of Truth, because there is an obvious gap between the two. One book has very poor writing, very flat characters. The author clearly doesn't really have any passion being put into this. Just don't really care. I think they're just trying to pump out a book. The other story has extreme intricacies, well-written, compelling characters with multiple layers. It's written by someone who has served in the military, who's very worldly, he knows lots of stuff, he's traveled, you can tell from just this bio. It says Noah Van Ewen, of course. If this bio is true, of course, then what I just said makes sense, and it's why Elemental Council is a book that is infinitely better than the run-of-the-mill 5 out of 10 corporate Black Library stuff. Another great example of author discrepancy is the Alpha Legion. The poor, poor Alpha Legion. These guys are perhaps some of the most abused of the Space Marine Legions, along with other characters like Lionel Johnson, just in the Horus Heresy in general, I mean, with authors writing things so inconsistently. In a book like Legion, and kind of in Deliverance Lost, the Alpha Legion are shown as these incredible, intelligent, mysterious things. From a human perspective, they are everywhere, they know everything, they have plans within plans, and it is incredibly hard to discern their goals. It's a wonderful mystery, especially in Legion, not so much in Deliverance Lost. In Deliverance Lost, they pull off quite the scheme, until the author has them make a pretty unbelievable, ridiculous mistake just to weave the plot to make sure the Raven Guard aren't completely destroyed. Move on to Praetorian of Dorn, and Alfarius has just become some idiot with these useless, nothing burger schemes that fuel just pride. He's outsmarted by Dorn, and the Alpha Legion's outsmarted by the Imperial Fist over and over again, overall achieving nothing but dying, really. After this, most Alpha Legion books have them being one of two things. They are either blundering fools, or they're poorly written geniuses with "this was my plan all along" trope, and having them just magically win. This is due to two major problems. Multiple authors write the Alpha Legion, and most authors are not masterminds, and so their plans rely heavily on plot conveniences and are just kind of impossible to describe well. That brings me to my last point, in that most Black Library authors simply do not have a grasp or understanding of advanced military tactics or doctrine or warfare in general. I think this is kind of a commonly known thing, as we can see especially with the casualty numbers in many of these conflicts being comically low. And you just kind of need to remember that these are just authors who write books for a job. They write Warhammer books for a job specifically a lot of the time. They're not esteemed army generals. They don't have any military experience whatsoever. Take, for example, doctrines like the Mount Ka or Cao Yan, along with something like the Emperor's Children Maraskara. These are all described to be these amazing, intricate strategies that shape the entire battlefield doctrines, but at the end of the day, they're just a lot of fancy words to describe extremely basic concepts. In this case, it's basically all up to the reader to use your imagination, and remember the intricacies of strategy are only as good as an author is intelligent in that specific area. So you kind of just, again, have to use your imagination. You have to kind of just assume that they're describing this really cool thing and that in practice it's a lot more advanced than simply kill the leader or ambush this guy or go this way and that way, because at the end of the day that's what they are. So you kind of just have to use your own power of belief. So yeah, I hope this makes sense. Overall, like I kind of said, you just need to blend all the lore together, kind of understand that authors write differently, authors are biased, authors are just bad sometimes, and take the good parts, take the bad parts with some salt, understand that there are different perspectives of authors, and that there's an overall picture being drawn, and you kind of just need to imagine that, this coagulation of lore, put that into one picture in your head, and there you go. Read about a unit in the Codex, and then read special specific things in books like a Fire Warrior's special equipment, or how the crew communicate, like in Kazarkin, there's some really cool crew perspective. And you can add that to the lore of the unit. But then, in another book, let's say some Space Marine book, where John Space Marine kills 30 crew in one fight, not really anything that's happened before, but you get the idea when that happens, and you're like, oh, crew actually suck, and no, that's not the case. You can see in another book where a crew shaper obliterates John Space Marine. So it's, again, just read all of these books, read all these codexes, or whatever you have time for. I understand people don't have time to read every single book, and get the grand scheme of things. I try to get every single piece of information that I can for my lore videos, which is why I don't release them very often, because they take a long time, and I want to have 100% accuracy with everything laid out. Overall, I hope this all made sense. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what you think. If I'm a complete fool and none of this made sense and I'm completely wrong, let me know. I'm hoping to make a video on the Harlequins killing Custodes incident, because I think that's a bit of an interesting situation that has been kind of bent and twisted by the community that have made all these weird rumors and things that I found no evidence for. So I'm going to look more into that and talk about it in the future. Hope you enjoyed the video. I love you guys. Stay strong out there, and read Elemental Council. It's a really good book. Bye-bye. The Iron Sheet video is coming out soon, by the way. I know I said that last video. I'm kind of trolling. I just had a random spark of inspiration to make this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. Iron Sheet will be coming soon. I've read all the lore I need to. The script is more or less done. And the Taros campaign, but as I said before, this is going to take eons. So I love you guys. See you later.